Hello, Saurabh.
Hey Raymond, how are you, my friend? Been a long time.
I know. Great to see you again.
Yeah, same here. I hope things are fine at your end, and congratulations on the new job posting.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it was a long, exhausting process.
Yeah, I can totally understand. I've been reading your posts consistently over the last few months, and I can totally understand. It must be
Yeah.
crazy to kind of get a job in these relentlessly turbulent times.
Well, also I'm picky too. That's another thing. I've actually turned down a lot of companies' requests for interviews because I I want to take my career in a certain direction. So I
Mhm.
only want to focus on specific languages and specific industries too.
All right, super.
I'm very, in other words, I'm very privileged
All
that
right,
I can say no to a lot of interview requests and
super.
try to wait for the right one. So
So, Raymond, so the idea was
yeah,
to have a brief conversation with you and listen
yeah,
a little bit about your journey. So, I've written a bunch of questions, and so basically, I'll just
sure.
start with asking you a little bit about yourself and just take us and walk us through your journey. From the time you started till now, and what are you doing? What are you going to be doing now? Exactly is the new job
Sure.
all about? And then walk us through your career. Right from the time you started and to what you've been doing all this while.
Sure. So I'm really excited. It's really a dream job for me. I've worked in a lot of different industries, from you know scooters to uh, smartwatches to consulting firms and so on. But my favorite obsession is television. That's one reason I live near Hollywood. I've been obsessed with TV and film since I was a child. I like to write. I'm artistic. All of that stuff. So I've always been obsessed in business terms with the streaming TV business, the streaming video business, and I've been following all the news and what's going on for years. And in the past, I worked for Pluto TV, which is in West Hollywood, and it's this is part of a market of so what I'm trying to say is that now I'm working in television again. I'm back in television, and that was really my number one choice. To explain the market a little bit for people who don't know, there have been two kinds of streaming TV markets. There's the market that everyone knows, which is subscription-based video on demand. Netflix, Amazon Video, Hulu, etc. Everyone knows those, the one that you pay for every month. And those are the most popular. But then there's a second market called ad-based video on demand, AVOD. The first one is called SVOD. This type of streaming TV market is AVOD, and these are all free. You can watch them all for free, and it's all supported by ads. And so I I'm really fascinated by this business in general, streaming TV. I wanted to, continue building my skills in that field because I already worked for Pluto TV. Pluto TV actually anyway, it's a long story, but Pluto TV got bought by Viacom CBS for $340 million last year. So the whole market is consolidating. All these big media entertainment companies are snatching up these AVOD companies to add revenue to their normal premium platforms, their premium channels, their premium programs. So what the job that I just got is for Tubi, which is a San Francisco startup, which started actually in 2014. And it originally was an ad tech startup called AdRise. And then they built all this basic advertising technology, and then to take advantage of that, they built a streaming video platform on top of that, which is actually very clever and which usually you don't see. Um, and they're the number one AVOD, ad-based video on demand platform in the world. Actually, they've now gone up to 23. They have 25 million viewers a month, and 23,000 movies and TV shows. Again, you can watch all free. They have partnerships with dozens of all the major movie studios to get, like Paramount, Warner Media, Sony, you name it, to get their movies. The whole point of this market is they show older TV shows and movies, not the most recent ones, which are premium, but ones that are, let's say, 5 years old or older that you still want to watch, Lionsgate and so on. And so Viacom CBS bought Pluto TV, which was my former company, for $340 million last year. And then Comcast bought Zumo and Vudu, which is owned by Walmart Plus, by the way, owned by Walmart. And then the last major AVOD streaming platform that was not bought, that was still independently owned, was Tubi. So Fox was looking around and saying, hey, we need something. We need to join the club. We need a free streaming ad-supported service too. So this year, a few months ago, I think so basically in June, Fox bought Tubi, my company, for $440 million. So now basically I work for Fox. I work for Rupert Murdoch, wow. which is crazy.
Wow.
So yeah, that's sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's a really fascinating, the whole trend of streaming video and how things have consolidated is absolutely fascinating. So that's what I've been doing. Yeah.
I can make it out from the happiness on your face that you're really happy about this particular job. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of advantages to it. I can talk forever. Sorry, long answer. Sure. But anyway, back to your earlier question, which is like, how did I get started in software? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, just a brief of how did you get started, and how did you just walk us through your entire career?
Okay, sure. So I've had a very non-traditional career. It's a long story, but I've actually had 5 different careers, which is not very typically Asian, right? I've always been rebellious and a nonconformist. And my parents never really understood that, as typical Asian parents would not.
I can totally understand.
But I'm very independent that way. So I didn't want to follow the crowd. I was very resistant. And I actually grew up in Silicon Valley. I'm from Cupertino, which is where Apple is. I grew up there as a kid. And, obviously I was surrounded by engineers and business people and saw all these people jumping into software. And for me, I was a big math and science nerd growing up. I was 3 years ahead of my peers in math when I was in junior high and high school, and I could have been a math major. I started coding and teaching myself at about age 13, started programming in like basic Pascal and Fortran. But at the same time, so while I liked science and math, I also loved literature and the humanities and history and politics and all that. So I liked both sides, and I was very torn. Part of me, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a writer. In another life, I probably would have been a newspaper reporter. That's how much I loved like literature and writing. But I always thought, I also don't want to be poor. That's the problem. I'm too practical, and I'm an immigrant, right? I wasn't born in the US. I'm actually Chinese from the Philippines. I didn't speak English when I came here. Mm-hmm. I came here when I was 2 years old from the Philippines. My grandparents are from China, actually. Mm-hmm. So, being a poor immigrant, I knew I didn't have the luxury to like try to be a writer. I had to make money. I had to do something practical. But at the same time, when I was 17, I thought at that time I wanted to be a physicist. I was really excited by Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman, and people mm-hmm. like that. Mm-hmm. Two of my uncles had actually studied physics. So mm-hmm. I was really drawn to that. But the thing was, at that time when I was deciding what to do, I just thought, I don't want to do software, because I had this mistaken view of software people. I believed in the negative stereotype of software people. You know what I mean? You know, people who are socially awkward, who are introverted, you know, are one-dimensional, kind of dull people. That was my view of software people. And I said, that's not me. I'm extroverted. I'm artistic. You know, I like a lot of other things. I don't play computer games. I'm not one of those people. And I was very torn. I was like, you know, I don't want to do software. It's too, that's not my personality. So I wanted to help the world in a different way that was practical, more practical. And so originally I started as a mechanical engineer. So it's a long story, but I got into MIT, I got into Cornell, I got into Berkeley. I was very lucky, you know, but I also didn't have money. You know, my family didn't have money. I didn't want to pay for private school. You know, Cornell and MIT wouldn't give me any grants. They only gave me loans. So, and I got like 3 scholarships to go to Berkeley. So a lot cheaper. So I went to Berkeley instead. And instead I started as a mechanical engineer, surprisingly, because I liked physics and I thought, oh, I want to work on renewable energy, something like this. And then after my first year at Berkeley, I thought I want to work on pollution, something with the environment. And I met a chemical engineering student who said, oh, you want to work on pollution and the environment? You got to come to chemical engineering. You know, that's where it's at. We're the ones tackling air and water pollution. So I mistakenly followed him and made a wrong choice and switched majors to chemical engineering from my second year on at Berkeley. Big mistake. After my first semester as a chemical engineering student, I absolutely hated it. I also did badly in school, by the way. My grades were not good at Berkeley at all, because Berkeley is notoriously, it grades on an extremely tough curve. And the average score, for you to get an average score on an exam, the average score on an exam is curved around a C+ at Berkeley. So, you know, everyone could get, the average could be 80% on the exam, C+. You're constantly competing with your classmates, who are all, by the way, some of the smartest people, you know, always typically the smartest people in their high schools. So, and, you know, a lot of us who go to Berkeley get this culture shock because we're typically one of the smartest people in our original high schools. And then we go there and we realize we're just average. We're just 1 out of a million. We're nothing. You know, that's how we feel.
Right.
So my grades were not good. They were actually pretty bad at Berkeley. And, you know, and it just didn't fit me. Chemical engineering was a bad fit. Like, I hated organic chemistry. I hated, like, chemical engineering is basically applied physical chemistry. You're applying physical chemistry to industrial processes to make oil, you know, cosmetics, drugs, food, things like that. It sounds cool. It sounds very practical, but academically, intellectually, it's very dull. I found it so dull. I remember one of the dullest things I had to do in my major was we did it was a class on heat transfer, and I did a whole lab on the drying of pellets. So we had a tray, we put in all these pellets, we put water on them, and then we let it dry, and then we weighed it every few minutes, and then we graphed how much it weighed, and then we did some thermodynamic calculations on it. Anyway, bottom line was, I didn't do well in school. And, you know, I was like, I got to change my major back to mechanical engineering or something else. But by that time, Berkeley wouldn't let me. So I was stuck. It was like I was in a bad marriage. And I just had to finish it all the way. The other difference was, you know, I also didn't care about my GPA. I know that's a weird thing to say for, again, a typical Asian achiever, I didn't care about my GPA. I cared more about learning. I was idealistic that way. And also I was naive, right? And idealistic. And I thought, who cares about my GPA? I just want to like take the toughest courses I can that sound interesting. And because of that, I really screwed up my GPA. You know, other people who care about their GPA, they will take easy classes to pad it, right? To keep their grades up. And because they care about graduate school or going to med school or whatever, I didn't think that way. I just took, like, I stupidly, as a freshman, I jumped into a junior level math course because I'd already taken 3 years of college math when I was in high school, because I was 3 years ahead of my classmates. So I jumped into a junior level math course. I took biochemistry, upper division biochemistry, without taking freshman biology. So that was a disaster. I almost flunked that course. I almost flunked my organic chemistry course. I think I got a D and I had to retake it. So that's how badly I was doing in school. And I took all these extra upper division physics and electrical engineering courses that I didn't really need, some of which I didn't need to take, but I thought they were interesting. So anyway, the bottom line is I screwed up my GPA and I hated my major, but I finished it anyway. I graduated, and then I started working in semiconductors, actually. So I went back to Silicon Valley, and it was going through Berkeley was a traumatic experience. A lot of people can feel depressed, and I definitely felt depressed at such a tough school, a cutthroat school. I went back to Silicon Valley, and then I realized, as a lot of people do after going to a top school, even though inside the school you feel like maybe a failure, you feel like, oh, I'm stupid, everyone else is better than me. Once you leave a top school, then you realize the world treats you differently. They don't treat you that way. Once I left Berkeley, everyone was like, oh, actually, you must be really good. So it was a really weird, like, culture shift. And I got my first choice job at Applied Materials, which is like one of the top semiconductor processing company in the world. So I worked there for a while as a process engineer. And even though I got to travel, I got to go to, work in Taiwan and work in Oregon and Texas and stuff like that and fly around, I honestly hated it. I was really, really bored. There was zero creativity in chemical engineering. I didn't use anything I learned in school. No thermodynamics, no equations, nothing. It was basically like being a glorified chef. I was basically coming up with recipes to etch silicon or oxide wafers, films on computer chips. And it was all very empirical. There was no theory. There was no calculation involved. It was just guessing. It was just, okay, let's change the recipe by, this oxygen level by this much and do an experiment. So I was really bored and realized I didn't want to stay in chemical engineering. So I left. I took some courses at San Jose State because I was in Silicon Valley. I was thinking of trying to go get a master's in electrical engineering, actually, because I liked physics. And then I met a computer engineering professor who said, no, you should go to software because software has a lot more creativity, a lot more work to do, blah, blah, blah. So then I jumped into software. And I took a few software courses, never got another degree. But after a few courses, I immediately got hired by a consulting firm in San Jose. So that was my very first software job without a CS degree, just a few CS courses and mostly self-taught. And so I worked there, this consulting firm. Then I worked at a startup next to Oracle. At that time I was doing Java. And then I worked at IBM for a couple of years. And sadly, again, it was not a good experience. At IBM, I was in IBM Global Services, and I joined IBM thinking, oh, I would be dealing with external clients for consulting. Instead, they put me on this really old 3-year-old internal project for their sales department. It was I was working with people who had been there for 20 something years at IBM and were just waiting to retire, working on very old technology. Again, not very exciting, not much creativity. And I just thought, wow, is this what software is like? I must have made another big mistake. So again, I didn't have a good experience. And then finally, IBM actually, one day IBM told me, they said, oh, we have, can you teach this engineer in India to do your job? So they had their office in India, and they're like, teach this guy in India to do your job. I'm like, okay. And then right after that, they laid me off. So, but the funny thing is that because I was so unhappy with that job and I felt like so dead inside at IBM, I was actually happy to get laid off. I was like happy that IBM cut the cord. But then after that, I was lost for a little bit. I was lost. I thought, wow, chemical engineering didn't work for me. I hated it. Software engineering didn't work for me. I had a bad experience too. Maybe engineering in general is bad for me. Maybe it's just like, it was a big mistake. Maybe I'm just not meant to be an engineer. And again, when I say this, it sounds very privileged. I know, to say that I can just leave a field. But that's, again, a more American way, individualistic way of thinking than the typical way in Asia. So I thought, after a lot of soul searching, I thought, oh, I want to, I didn't apply for a software job again. I thought, I'm more of a people person. I'm more outgoing. I want to help people more directly. Maybe I should go more towards like biology or healthcare. I thought about that. So I actually went to community college, and near Stanford, there's a community college called Foothill College, and I started taking biology courses. And I took anatomy, physiology, microbiology, genetics. I trained as an EMT. I went through all that. Ultimately, long story short, sorry if this is a very long story, but I basically ended up working in spinal surgery for 4 years. So I didn't go to med school, but I was a neurophysiologist. I worked with orthopedic and brain surgeons and vascular surgeons for 4 years on over 400 surgeries at over 50 hospitals with over 50 surgeons in 7 states. So I was flying around the country working there. And like my first surgical job was actually in Boston. I got trained on the job. The company trained me. And basically this profession, being a neurophysiologist, I was basically I was a security guard for the nervous system. It's not as exciting as it sounds. I was basically, what I did was I had about 20 needles, okay? And I would stick them into patients after they were asleep, after they were under anesthesia. I would stick them into their head, their scalp, and into their upper and lower body, their hands and feet. And depending on where the surgery was, near their neck, if it was a neck surgery, or near their back, if it was a back surgery. I'd stick needles into them, then I'd shock them with electricity, and then I'd make them jump on the table for the entire 6-hour surgery. And then I'd monitor their nerve signals on a laptop right behind the surgeon. I was part of a surgical team of maybe 6 to 10 people in the operating room. And that's what I did all day. I would just stare at nerve signals going across the screen. And then as the surgeon was chopping away, was cutting, if the surgeon got too close to the nerve or irritated the nerve, it would ping the nerve and I would see it on my screen. And I'd say, oh, you're getting too close to left C3, back off. That's what I did all day. And again, as you can imagine, being a security guard, it was very dull. While I was helping people, and I loved helping people and dealing with patients, unfortunately, my favorite part of the job was actually talking to patients and meeting their families. Initially, I would meet them at 6 in the morning or 6:30 in the morning before we had our 7 a.m. surgery. But that was only the first 15 minutes of the job. After that, they would be unconscious for 6 hours. There'd just be a slab of meat on the table. I never got to talk to the patients. So again, like being a security guard or like being a pilot, you know, my job wasn't creative. There was no creativity. It was very dull, and my job was to make sure the surgery was dull. Like if it's dull, that's a good thing. Like flying a plane, you want the flight to be dull. It was for safety. So my job was to prevent paralysis. So anyway, yeah, after doing all that, after working 4 years in spinal surgery, you know, 400 surgeries, all kinds of stuff, traveling around the country. Again, I thought, you know, I really don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to do medicine. My favorite part of medicine I thought if I did become a doctor, what would I be? I would rather be Dr. House, you know? I'd rather be the detective, the person who sees you at the beginning when nobody knows what's wrong with you and does a diagnosis and examines you. I'd rather be that guy than the guy later on after everyone already knows your diagnosis and is just doing a procedure. Mm-hmm. It can be a very complex procedure like brain surgery, and I worked on some brain surgeries too, but it doesn't matter how complex it is, it becomes repetitive. I mean, I got to work at 5 hospitals. My first job was actually working at 5 hospitals in Boston, hospitals connected to Harvard and Tufts medical schools. So I was working with these like top surgeons from Harvard and Johns Hopkins and Northwestern, and later on in LA. I came to LA because of surgery, actually. So I worked with like USC, all these hospitals in LA and Orange County. Anyway, bottom line is, you know, in that process, again, I just realized it wasn't for me. I was really feeling unfulfilled. And at that time, that's when, this was back in 2012, 2013. So it's already 7 or 8 years ago. That's when, you know, MIT and Stanford then put their first year computer science courses all online for free. Remember, 7 or 8 years ago? So that blew me away. And I thought, wow, I wish I had this when I was learning software. Free course that's, you know, free entire 1-year course at Stanford and at MIT. Wow. You know, so I started looking at the Stanford course and it was on YouTube. The videos, lectures were on YouTube. And, but I'd had a bad experience my first time in software. You know, again, remember, I had already left engineering. I had thought, no more engineering for me, I'm done. And I had a bad experience the first time around when I was learning Java. I didn't really understand it very well. I didn't really learn it to that much depth. And so I was a little bit afraid. I thought, well, can I handle it this time around, right? Do I have the brains for it? I don't know. And so I started taking the Stanford course, watching the lectures, you know, YouTube, whatever, and reading the book, doing the homework. And surprisingly, after just 5 days, I finished half of the entire 1/4 course. Like, I was like, wait a minute, I'm actually faster than these Stanford students. You know, maybe it's not that bad. You know, this was doing the homework, watching the lectures, and reading the book. I finished half of the whole thing in 5 days, the whole course. Because the difference was the teacher was good. It was a really good professor. And I learned a lot. And I thought, oh, okay, now I get it. These things that I never learned the first time around, now they made sense to me. And also probably by then I had become more mature. You know, it had been several years. So anyway, I started in the middle of, this is funny, but in the middle of surgery, I'd be looking at computer science websites on the computer. You know, we didn't endanger any patients, don't worry. Because it was a long surgery. But I started studying computer science while I was in the middle of the operation. And then that's when, like, coding boot camp started to come out. The very first coding boot camp was in 2012, was Dev Bootcamp in San Francisco. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. I have to jump on this. This is an amazing idea, you know? So that's when I finally like started doing it. I went through an online boot camp that was called Tea Leaf Academy, but now it's called Launch School. That was really good. And I started going through Ruby for that. Actually, wait, let me back up. So one more thing is that I had also been a teacher too. So while I was doing, I taught for 8 years. I was a private tutor, mostly for rich kids. You know, the kids that got caught up in the college admissions scandal last year?
Yeah.
Those are my kids. Those kind of people were my kids, my students, basically rich kids, okay? I taught a lot of rich high school students in Silicon Valley and LA, like some of the rich, you know, who were going to expensive private schools. And I taught that for 8 years. I was a private tutor. I would go to their home. I felt like a real estate agent because I'd go to these these big mansions, you know, to teach their kids. Anyway, so while I was doing surgery in the daytime, at night, I was also a tutor. So I actually had 2 jobs. I would wake up at 5 a.m., get to the operating room by 6 a.m., do a 6-hour surgery, come home in the early afternoon, sleep a few hours, wake up at 6 p.m., have dinner, and then teach for 4 more hours at night. So I had at my peak, I had up to 20 students a week. And I would be driving, I felt like a real estate agent. I'd be driving to all these homes at night. And then I'd wake up the next day for another surgery. It was crazy. I actually made more money from teaching than from surgery. Right. It's funny. Right. And anyway, so I did all that. The point is, I was a teacher. I was a private tutor. And one day I was coming home from a surgery in Hermosa Beach. And then I saw this new learning center had been built with a sign that said, you know, those learning centers teaching kids, like typically they tutor you on English and math. And typically these are Asian, you know, Chinese or Korean or whatever learning centers. But then I saw a learning center that said, teach kids to code. And that was like revolutionary for me because I'd never seen a learning center like this. So I called them up. I called up the founder and said, wow, this is amazing. What's this all about? And, you know, he told me that he was teaching kids, you know, following the Kumon technique. Do you know Kumon by any chance?
No, I don't.
It's a series of learning centers. I think it's Japanese, where you give these kids worksheets. They're on paper, and then it's completely self-paced, and you use that to teach yourself math. So it's all these like worksheets, and you just go as far as you can at your own pace. And that founder of the learning center, which is called UCode, he was a software engineer, and his son was a prodigy. He had started his son at Kumon, doing Kumon math at age 4. And by the time his son was 6 years old, he was already doing calculus. And it was insane. So anyway, the point is he thought, well, I'm going to apply this Kumon technique to teaching kids to code. So I said, wow, this is amazing. I would love to volunteer for you and help out and see what's going on. You know, I haven't done any coding for years now. I left engineering. You know, I've forgotten everything already. But if I can help, that'd be great. He said, sure, come on and volunteer. So I volunteered at his learning center. And he said, oh, by the way, you need to learn Ruby. I'm like, what's Ruby? You know, I'd never heard of Ruby, the language. So that's how I started getting into it. I went through the online boot camp. And then finally, one day I left my surgical job. I said, you know, that's it. I'm done with surgery. I'm burnt out. And I applied to 2 boot camps, one App Academy in San Francisco, and the other one was Flatiron School in New York. I got into Flatiron School,
So Raymond,
and
Raymond,
then eventually moved to New York. Yeah.
we'll take a break of 5 minutes and then we'll
Sure.
again resume. All right. So again reconnect with you. So we'll take a break of 5
Oh,
minutes.
sure.
Fine with
Sure.
you?
Yeah, sure. No problem.
All right. Super. Thank you.
So do I pause or?
No, I'll pause it and I'll again
Okay.
reconnect with you. I'll send you a link.
Okay. Okay. No problem. Hello.
Hi Raymond, welcome back after that brief little break.
Yeah,
So
no problem.
I was loving every bit of the story that you talked about it, and it's very impressive and it's very enlightening to a lot of students in India who've always thought about a single career. So the kind of struggle
Oh,
you faced in your career, in the bunch of different careers, and then finally you decided that software is something that you really like. So it's very interesting. It's very, very interesting.
yes, it's very not the traditional Asian way. um, yeah, it's because, again, I was very rebellious. I guess I still am kind of rebellious and a nonconformist. And I didn't want to do it based on money. I didn't want to do it based on security. I had to really, feel like something artistic, some real real passion for it, where even if you didn't pay me, I would still do it willingly. That's the kind of career I think ideally we want. And it took me a lot of trial and error to organically end up stumbling on software again after I'd already left engineering. It wasn't because of parental or societal pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It was from me gradually realizing things about myself psychologically, mm-hmm. and the field itself, software itself.
Right.
I like to tell people that I like to joke that I'm clearly very good at making decisions on what to do in life, given that I jumped around multiple careers and couldn't figure it out. But I think a reason, which I didn't understand before, that software is actually a really good fit for me is because I'm a writer by nature. It's because I've always been a writer since I was 5 years old.
Right.
And if you look at really good software engineers, they tend to be writers the way they think. They tend to be writers and editors. Mm-hmm. So instead of calling us software engineers, you should call us software writers. That's what David Heinemeier Hansson said, the creator of Ruby on Rails. He has the same view, which I share, which is that if you're trying to decide between two people to come into who are new to software, who has more potential, I would always pick the better writer.
Right.
The person who cares about literature and grammar and expression, is really picky about words, that person will tend to do better as a software engineer. And again, many people don't get that. Many people jump into software because they hate English, because they hate writing and literature, and they think, oh, that's the way to escape that. Completely wrong. I think the people who end up becoming leaders in the field tend to be really good at speaking and writing, and tend to really care. And if you look at the, for example, Tim O'Reilly, the founder of, O'Reilly Books, I think I'm sorry?
No, O'Reilly Media, yeah.
Yeah, O'Reilly Media. Yeah, if you look at his degree, he didn't study computer science. He studied classics at Harvard. If you look at the writers of some of these big computer books, often their degree is English. They never studied computer science.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I noticed this transition between people who are good at speaking and writing and software. That's why I've seen a lot of ex-lawyers jump into software easily, or ex-people in linguistics, or who come from even political science, history, marketing, whatever. I've seen all these other people who have done well with no computer science background because they're good at writing. I think that's the key thing that ties them together. Anyway, and I was always very picky, as you see when I write my posts. I will edit them many times. I was very picky as an essayist.
Mm-hmm.
And always thinking, oh, my writing is, I can always make it this much better. It's never finished.
Mm-hmm.
I have that same view with code. And I found my mindset as an editor perfectly translated over to being a coder. Anyway, long story. So then when I went back to, when I decided on my boot camp, I finally got into, I tried to get into Flatiron School in New York. It was still very new at the time. This was 2013. And but the problem was I applied very late. So this is another problem I faced. I had just quit my job in surgery, but I had no backup plan.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had quit before I had applied to a boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
And and I said, and then I called Flatiron School. This was at the end of August. Flatiron School was about to start in about 3 weeks. There wasn't a lot of time to apply and get in.
Right.
And so my timing was not good.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called Flatiron School, and the founder actually answered the phone. And I said, do you guys have any openings in your September class, your fall class? He thought a minute and he said, probably not. We're probably all full right now. We might have 1 or 2 spots left. That's it. I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because the next class of Flatiron School wasn't until the following February. And I just left my job in spinal surgery.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, I'm not going to sit around unemployed for 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, okay, I have to get into this fall class no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote a really good essay, a very careful essay. And I thought, how do I impress them so they make me one of the last 1 or 2 people they admit to the class? What can I do that will blow them away?
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I started going through coding challenges on Project Euler. Do you know Project Euler?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so that site has been around for 15 years or so, and it has 600 something algorithm problems that are pretty mathematical. Mm-hmm. And again, I was new to Ruby, but I used that as a way not only to learn Ruby, but to teach myself data structures and algorithms. So without a course, without a boot camp, that's how I started teaching myself. And that's how I recommend everyone else start learning too. I don't agree with the traditional way of learning data structures and algorithms where, you wait for a professor or a teacher to spoon feed you everything. That's not the way to learn. I think a better way to learn is what I did, which was just jump in to the deep end, cold turkey, and start doing really hard algorithm problems.
Right.
And then you look up everything you need along the way. So yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, so I did nothing but that. I just locked myself in my apartment and didn't see friends, didn't go out. I just did Project Euler questions day and night for 2 weeks. And by the end and I looked up everything I didn't know. I looked at YouTube, Wikipedia, I looked at college lectures, blog posts. So sometimes it would take me 8 hours to do one problem. I would spend the entire day doing one problem because I'd be reading up on everything else connected to the problem,
mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't look at the solution. I would try to really hard to do it myself without cheating. And then let's say I had really been stuck for 5 hours of trying. Then finally I would look at a solution online. But that solution and I was doing all my questions in Ruby, but that solution would typically be written in Java or Python or C++ or something else. So I would look at the solution, but then I would still have to translate it. I would have to understand it in another language and then translate it back to Ruby. Mm-hmm. And then I would rewrite my initial solution 2 or 3 more times to keep making it better. Mm-hmm. That's how I taught myself. So by the end of 2 weeks, I had finished 44 problems. I'd written 44 programs. And I learned a lot. It was amazing. And along the way, I was posting all my solutions on GitHub and emailing it to Flatiron School. I would just, every week, I didn't hear back from them. And I'd say, I'd write them an email. I'd say, I know you guys are really busy trying to, doing your admissions process. I know there are just like 2 weeks left before the school starts, the boot camp starts. Just wondering how things are going with my application. And by the way, I just did 15 more problems on Project Euler. Here you go. So I would do that every week, and I would hear nothing back from them. But finally, I got an email from them, and they said, okay, we want to do a Skype interview of you. And then the co-founder of Flatiron, who was this Harvard MBA guy, this venture capitalist guy, he called me and he said, his first question of the interview was, so what do you do for fun? Like, do you have any other hobbies besides Project Euler? So, in other words, they had been reading all my emails and looking at what I'd been doing. They just never said anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then during that interview, they never asked me a single technical question. I kept saying, well, do you want me to code anything or answer any computer science questions? And he said, no, we're good. I said, okay. So then they accepted me as one of the last people in that class because I had applied so late, and I got accepted with 1 week before school started. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I had to move out of my apartment. At that time I was living in Redondo Beach, which is like Southwest LA County. I had to leave my entire apartment. I put all my stuff in my car in someone's garage. My dad had a cousin, and I put all my stuff in his garage, and I took 2 suitcases, bought a plane ticket, and moved to Manhattan. Like all in 1 week. So I moved to New York, and I joined the class, and everyone else had been admitted before me. And when I started meeting my classmates at the boot camp, I had a class of 40 other students, a total of 41 people. And I asked them, oh, how was your admissions process? What was it like? And they all said, oh, they asked us to write a tic-tac-toe program, and they asked us to write a second one. They all had to write 2 programs, on the interview to get in. And they asked me, how about you? I said, really? They didn't ask me to write anything. So the thing is, I had kind of out-nerded the other people in the class.
Yeah, that's like.
Yeah.
So Raymond, I think.
Anyway, it's a long story. Sorry about that. Long story.
That's cool. So we'll take one more question, and this question I know is going to be huge, but this is a very important question, and I think I've been asked this question by a lot of guys
sure.
in engineering.
Sure.
So I think the question. So you spoke a little bit about it in terms of how you prepared for Flatiron, and you worked on Project Euler for a couple of days and everything.
A couple of weeks,
Couple of weeks, right? No, so a lot of engineering students, when they come out of the engineering colleges and they're about to get a job or something, somehow they find that there is a deficit in the knowledge, right? In terms of computer science, in terms of skills, in terms of coding, in terms of a lot of other things, right? So if you were to, since you've already gone through that drill, you know what it takes to kind of crack these top interviews at FANG companies or companies like FANG or startups and all. So if you were to advise a bunch of guys as to what exactly they should do in terms of the preparation, and also recommend a series of books or blogs or podcasts that you actually heard or you think are good, that will actually help those students a lot, because that's the cultural difference between India and SF that we are trying to bridge through this interview, so that students in India also know what exactly is people like you, what is it that you guys refer to, what is it that you study, what books you refer to, and how do you prepare. That will be really helpful for people.
Okay, so are you talking about specifically FANG companies or other kinds of startups?
Any tech companies, not FANG particularly. Any company, any tech companies for that instance.
So basically, how to get in, or how to give yourself an advantage? Is that what your question is about?
Yeah.
How to prepare?
How to prepare? If someone were to get into one of these tech companies, how should one prepare systematically?
I mean, obviously, first of all, there are many blog posts and videos about this that you can find, like, that are much more comprehensive than what I would say. And also, I have never worked for a FANG company yet. The only FANG company I've gotten a lot of requests from, all the FANG companies have called me, but I always have felt, oh, I still need to prepare more, you know, so I've never really done it. Interviewed with most of them. I've said actually no to most of the interviews. The only interview I did was with Google earlier this year. I did a 4-hour on-site with Google, and I got rejected. But that's the only FANG company I've actually interviewed with and gone through the process with. But yeah, in terms of how to prepare, so it's really weird, right? Because to be a good software engineer is very different from being good at interviewing for software jobs. Those are two separate things, two completely separate skills that we need to be good at, unfortunately. It's not enough just to be good at working. We also have to be good at this whole interview game, you know, but also being good at the interview game doesn't mean you'll actually be a good software engineer when you're actually hired. Those are two separate skills.
Sure.
And so to play the interview game, it depends on the company. So not all companies are interview like FANG, actually. Some of them, you know, barely ask any algorithm questions at all. Some of them are more interested in practical things you can do. So for example, like with Tubi, I got some algorithm questions, but it was nothing like Amazon or Google. Actually, what I had to do for Tubi, one thing was, like, I spent 2 hours of my Tubi interview just building an API from scratch. So they had me, they basically had one engineer watch me, a different engineer watch me do it for each hour. They said, okay, build this thing completely from scratch. You don't have to finish it. We know you can't finish it in 2 hours, but we're just gonna watch you. That's what they said. And they said, use any language, any database, any framework you want. We'll just watch you build it. So one guy just stared at me for 1 hour as I built this API, this basic API feature to duplicate in a simple way something that Tubi does on their site. And during the hour, I kept talking the whole time about what I was doing. And I would say, well, do you have any questions for me? Do you want to ask me any? He's like, no, I'm fine. I'm just watching you work. So that was kind of weird, but that's what happened for 2 hours. Like each hour, a different engineer. And then, but being me, so one advice I would give people, this is something that I like to do, which most people never do, but it always gives me an advantage, which is if you don't finish something in the interview, or you don't feel like you only did a mediocre job, you know, what you should do is after the interview, finish it. Like go home, finish it, redo the whole thing where you felt you did a mediocre job or was incomplete, send it to the company anyway.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I often do that, especially if I really like the company and I want to give myself an edge. And guess what? Oftentimes it works. Oftentimes after the interview, maybe they're thinking, oh, we're not sure about this guy. Yeah, he was good, but he wasn't outstanding. And everyone is looking for, quote, outstanding candidates. The market is so competitive now. It's not enough to be good. You have to clearly be exceptional.
Right.
You have to clearly stand out from like 200 people applying for the same job. And you have to assume at least 200 people are applying for that job. So always be thorough. Always go one step beyond what everyone else would do. And that's actually gotten me at least 3 or 4 jobs by doing that.
Okay.
So in this case, I kind of did the same thing. I went home and I redid, well, I didn't redo, but I completed this part that I hadn't finished in the 2 hours, you know, that first 2 hours of my on-site interview. And then I emailed it to the recruiter and the engineer the next day. And then they emailed it to everyone else on the team. So I think they appreciated that.
Okay.
And anyway, so what would you do to prepare? I would say if it's a FANG type interview, again, there are many blog posts and videos about this, so you can easily find out how to do it. But what I would say is if it's a FANG style company, you need to do a minimum of 100 lead code type problems, at least 100 minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not do that myself. So I did not follow my own advice. I've only done about 20 something lead code problems, which is probably why I got rejected from Google, right? I wasn't fast enough. If you do 100 or 200 problems and you time yourself, it's like training for the Olympics. You're training to be an athlete. You have to cut down the time that you can solve problems and that you can recognize the general category of problems. Let's say there are maybe 14 different types of categories. There's an educative course, educative.io, that teaches you about these 14 different types of problems in categories. If you do at least 100, maybe 150 problems, that should be enough. I'd say at least 100, 150. Some people tell me they do, they go crazy and do 300, 400 problems. I'm not that crazy. I wouldn't spend a year. That's way too much time. I'd say at least 100 to 200 problems. And then do a few from each category, each of the major 14 or so types. And then time yourself and cut it down so you can get it done like 15 or 20 minutes for a problem. That's what I would do if I wanted to get into FANG. Mm-hmm. And then that's only the algorithm part, but that's the hardest part. And then obviously the rest is all the, the soft skills and interviewing, the culture fit and all that, which I think is a lot easier to prepare for. Now, if you want to prepare for like a non-FANG company that's not just asking strict algorithms, then what they're going to ask about is they're going to ask you advanced questions in your main computer language. So you're selling yourself. A lot of bootcamp students and new grads don't get this. The problem with a lot of new grads and bootcamp students is that they're too superficial across the board and they're unfocused. So when you ask them, what kind of software job do you want? They don't know. They just say, I don't know. I just want some full stack job, front end, back end, any language, I don't care. That's not the right answer. You want to be really focused and you want to sell yourself as a specialist. So you want to say, I am a back-end JavaScript developer. That's my bread and butter. That's where I'm an expert on. Or I'm a front-end React developer, or I'm a back-end Ruby developer. That's where I want to get my first job. You want to be that specific. Or I'm a iOS Swift developer. That's how you will get in. If you just say, I'll just take any job and I don't care which way, what language it is, whatever, people will just say next. They won't take you seriously because everyone wants specialists. I always tell people when you're again, software companies are very competitive. They hire less than 1% of their applicants. And this is not just FANG companies. This is any company average company that you've never even heard of. Everyone is that picky. It doesn't matter if you're working in shoes or makeup or whatever. It doesn't have to be a famous company. They're all super picky that way. And so it's like, I tell people, it's like trying to join a band. It's like trying to join the Beatles. All my software teams have been really small, typically 2 to 5 people. That's it. That's how big the team is, the size of a band. But just like a band, you have thousands or millions of fans or customers. You're serving thousands or millions of people. That means every person, every musician on the band has to be really outstanding to get in the band. So that means you have to be a specialist in that one thing, that one language that you're claiming to be good at. And that's a big mistake for junior people. They try to say they know everything. They're too general. And I'm like, okay, but what are you good at? And they don't even know. They jump around too much. They're very wishy-washy. So the one thing I would say to prepare is focus and know what you're selling yourself as an expert on. So if you say, I'm a front-end React developer, you've got to be able to answer questions on advanced React and to be able to build stuff in React from scratch quickly, and know the theory behind it, blah, 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 and know also advanced JavaScript and be able to know questions that are from the end of the book. One big problem that I see, again, with most new grads, especially bootcamp grads, is that they almost never read a single book. They watch videos, they take online courses. That's great. They go through tutorials, they read blog posts. Nobody actually reads an entire book. It's very simple, but they don't do it, right? But reading a book if you read a book on your main language, whatever that is, whether it's JavaScript, Ruby, React, whatever, like the stuff at the end of the book, the advanced stuff, that's what companies will always ask. They always want to know, do you know this stuff in like chapter 22 in the book? They don't care about the stuff in chapter 3. That's nice. And again, most people neglect that, and that's where they choke. So whether you're applying for a FANG company or a non-FANG company that's not so algorithm heavy, you still need to be an expert. Show that you're an expert on your main language, or that you can pick it up. Like, let's say, like for me right now, I'm going to be working in a new language, Elixir, which I've never coded in before. Okay, so I have to learn that from scratch. But I was already a senior Ruby engineer. I was a senior JavaScript engineer, and I also now am a senior Golang engineer. I've already been, a senior in 3 different languages. So they expect me to be able to pick up things quickly. That's part of the job. And so if I can show I'm an expert on some other language and can advance, then they think, okay, you probably could pick up this thing too. Okay, that's another thing. Know your language really well. Know your algorithms and data structure super well. What other thing is good? I think another key thing where people are lacking, especially new grads, is they don't know, they never really study standard international protocols, which all engineers use worldwide, like HTTP, like TCP, right? Like SSL or OAuth 2, or you name it. All those things that we build all our code on top of, most people never study that stuff, or they never really look into it in that level of detail. Yet I've been asked many questions about that. And as soon as you start talking about protocols, and you read those internet documents, those official documents, and look at the specs and can talk at that level, immediately engineers give you a new level of respect. And they see, oh, you know what you're talking about, because you're talking about these international standards. Boot camps never teach this stuff. Another thing is where people, or neglect is they never think, a lot of beginners, they don't think about software testing or QA. And they never think from the QA person's point of view, or think about how to make their code reliable. So that's another big weakness. Learn that, and you should do TDD, test-driven development, from the very start when you're learning. Almost nobody does that. No one writes tests. Most junior people never write a single test at all. If I'm interviewing you, one of the first questions I might ask is, oh, how would you write a test for this? Or have you written any software tests before? And if you've never written a single test before, immediately in my head, I think reject. That's the easiest way to distinguish between junior people and people who are more ready for the job. Another thing is, another major thing that people never do, often, again, junior people, is they often never work on open source projects. That's one of my, the biggest things that I advise people. If you look at my articles and my videos, I always say, like, the best way to stand out from the crowd, besides a paid job, is to fix bugs and add features to popular open source projects on GitHub. And why is that important? Because most students and bootcamp grads, what kind of code do they look at? They only look at other student code, other junior people's code. And just like becoming a good, remember the analogy I made between being a good writer and being a good software engineer, that there's a strong relationship. Mm-hmm. Well, how do you be a good writer? Do you only read student essays, right? How do you be good at English? How do you be good at Hindi? Do you only read like what other students have written? Of course not. You read the best writers in your language. Right. You read, so to be a good, we study literature. We study Charles Dickens. We study Shakespeare, right? That's how we become good at English. We study the newspaper. And similarly, to be a good engineer, you should study senior engineers' code. But schools never teach you to look at senior engineers' code. Why? Because they think it's too hard. They think it's too hard for you. So they give you simpler stuff. But the problem with that is you never learn what the real code looks like in a production environment. And you never get used to having to figure it out and modify it and grapple with it and struggle with it. But that's exactly what companies want, because they want to hire people who've worked on code that has had real customers. But most student projects have no customers at all. So that's why it's working on open source is the next best thing to a paid job, because if it's a popular open source project, they have, hundreds or thousands of stars or millions or thousands of users. And if you can get your code merged in, if you make pull requests and get your code merged in to the master branch of a popular open source project on GitHub, that means that a senior engineer at some company has read your code and thinks that your code is good enough for thousands or millions of users. And that's like amazing, and you should brag about it.
Right, so that actually clears a lot of point, and I think it's very valuable for students to consider that. So Raymond, I think we have time for only this, in our episode. But
sure. And again, sorry for my very long answers.
Not at all. These were very helpful actually, because I think what you said actually solves a lot of problem, a lot of dilemma and questions students have out here. So when we post this and share it with students out here, this would actually go out and help them out a lot, because they'll understand what computer science is in the context of coding. And when you're learning a programming language, in terms of the intricacies and nuances of the language, what is it that you need to keep in mind? So your long answers are actually quite helpful, because we don't have these kind of answers anywhere across YouTube. And I've seen like 1,000 videos on programming. You don't answers, right?
Actually, I want to just say one more thing, if it's okay. Well, one thing is, I see a lot of students from India and China, they focus just on lead code, just on cranking through the hundreds of algorithm problems, either that or memorizing some of their solutions. That's also not enough. So that's good for passing this narrow scope of a Google or a FANG interview, yes, maybe, but that's not enough in proving to people that you have practical knowledge, that you've dealt with the business side of coding, right? And you've thought like an entrepreneur. That's great to crank through hundreds of problems. That's cool. But I think something that also would be, and besides doing open source, which most people never do, I think another cool thing that you could try to do, which most people never do, is actually build something for a real customer. So that could be your mom, it could be your relatives, your friends, it could be a restaurant across the street and you notice that their website is terrible, right? It could be your doctor's office. Pick someone you know and say, hey, do you need any help? Or do you need a website? Or, I notice your site is kind of empty right now. Do you mind can I help you? And then you try to show some initiative maybe negotiate a little contract with them, a short-term contract, and just build something for them, a real business. And my point is the experience of going through that will teach you much more than a typical course, and will give you a lot of street cred and a lot of practical things. You will pick up a lot of tips that you never would learn in school. And again, most people never do that. So.
I totally agree. It's a win-win situation for both the parties. So I totally agree on that point, because I've also done the same thing while I was learning how to program. I actually used to take up these projects, small projects, and solve it for people and make money through that. That helped me a lot, actually. But Raymond, thank you so much. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I'm just saying one thing is, like, I see a lot of these bootcamp projects, they're very cookie cutter, and they all look alike. They kind of look similar. And the number one problem with bootcamp projects, they always have 0 customers. No one is actually using or paying for this site. So you never have to meet the higher standards that you need for business. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I've talked too long.
No problem. So Raymond, so thank you so much for being on this show, and thank you so much for talking to us and sharing your wonderful career and insights into how you prepared when you were preparing, and it's very interesting. I have never heard such a story in a very long time. So,
oh, really?
Thank you so much for sharing it, and I think we'll have more of such interviews over the coming weeks, so that we understand computer science in much more detail and depth, and probably this gap between Silicon Valley and Bangalore kind of diminishes over the next couple of months. So thank you so much, and have a great day.
Oh, my pleasure. And please send me the link when you have the video up. I would love to share it if possible.
I will do that right away. Tomorrow itself, I'll do that. All right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Saurabh. And good luck with your company as well, your new business.
Thank you so much, Raymond. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.